Today I will tell you a story about a son who erased his mother from the happiest day of his life with a single text. His words seemed polite, almost harmless, but they carried the cruelty of a blade. He wrote, "Better for the vibe if you stay away." That was it. A simple sentence that cut deeper than silence ever could. He never asked who paid for the rooms his guests would sleep in, who approved the menus they would eat from, or who stocked the champagne they planned to toast with. My hand would later sign one word, void, and the aisle they so carefully decorated would go dark. His fairy tale vanished overnight, undone not by rage, but by the kind of silence no one sees coming. If you find meaning in stories of dignity, betrayal, and the quiet justice life delivers, remember to like, subscribe, and share. Here in Grandma Life Stories, every tale carries the weight of truth and the lessons we promise ourselves never to forget. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 68 years old, the widow of a man who believed in building quietly but building strong. Together, we transformed a single lakeside inn with peeling wallpaper and sagging floors into Carter Hospitality, a collection of resorts now valued at $70 million. People see the marble floors, the chandeliers, the crisp linens, but they do not see the hands that worked through the night to polish every corner. Those hands were mine. I never chased applause. I never needed a spotlight. My joy was in watching others celebrate inside the spaces I had shaped. My husband used to say, "Evelyn, roots never get credit, but without them, nothing blooms." I took that to heart. I chose to be the root, steady and unseen, holding everything together. But the night I received that message from my only son, Joseph, I realized the danger of being unseen for too long. He had begun to believe I was dispensable. I was in my office at our Miami resort, a room overlooking the ocean where the lights of the city shimmered across the waves. The air was warm, scented faintly with salt and jasmine from the gardens below. On my desk rested a porcelain teacup with a hairline crack running down its handle. I had carried that cup for years. Imperfect, yet dependable, it had never failed to hold warmth. The phone buzzed once, then again. I glanced down and saw Joseph's name. A small smile tugged at my lips. No matter how old children become, mothers respond with hope. I opened the message expecting a question about floral arrangements, maybe a thank you for the deposit I had wired to secure their venue upgrades. What I found instead hollowed me out in an instant. "Mom, it's better for the vibe if you don't come." I read it once, then again, as if repetition might change the letters. My breath caught, my chest tightened, my fingers slipped slightly against the porcelain, and the teacup rattled softly against the desk. Not a call, not even a voice trembling with hesitation. Just a dismissal wrapped in a flimsy excuse about atmosphere. The word vibe struck me hardest. As if I, the woman who had carried Joseph through every storm of his life, was now reduced to a threat against his curated aesthetic. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence grow heavy around me. Outside, the lobby of the resort hummed with laughter and the echo of music. Guests toasted champagne under the same chandeliers I had chosen decades ago, never knowing the grief pressing down on the woman who had given them those moments. I did not cry. My eyes remained dry, though my hands trembled against the cracked porcelain cup. Not from anger, from recognition. Somewhere in the years of polished parties and glittering facades, my son had stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a liability. In that moment, I remembered Daniel's words, spoken softly years before. "If they ever forget your worth, Evelyn, the walls you built will remind them." I placed the phone face down on the desk, the message glowing faintly beneath the glass. I wrapped my palms around the teacup, steadying myself. And I whispered into the quiet, "Better for the vibe, you said. Then let us see how strong a vibe stands on its own." I knew even then what the silence inside me was preparing to do. The morning after Joseph's text, I opened my laptop to review vendor confirmations. My inbox blinked with a forwarded email. The subject line was simple, almost sterile. "Final venue note, important." I clicked, and the message filled my screen. "Ensure Mrs. Carter is not permitted. Her presence would be disruptive." The word disruptive sat in bold type, centered in the middle of the planner's reply thread. The planner had forwarded it by mistake, and now there it was, staring at me like a scar burned onto glass. Disruptive. Not mother, not guest, not Evelyn Carter, who had paid the deposit and signed the contracts. Just a disruption. I froze. My breath caught as my pulse quickened. First the text from my son, now an email from his bride-to-be. A text that erased me, an email that branded me. Together they cut deeper than any open insult could. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but I did not type a word. Instead, I leaned back and stared at the word until it blurred. Disruptive. Memories hit me hard, uninvited. I saw Joseph as a boy sitting at our kitchen table, his legs swung under the chair as he watched me hem tablecloths late into the night. My sewing machine hummed while he leaned his cheek on his hand, asking questions about thread and fabric. Those same tablecloths later decorated his school recitals, birthday parties, even his first summer job banquet. Back then, he would beam with pride and tell his friends, "My mom made this." Now, that same woman was deemed a threat to his atmosphere. I pressed my palms flat against the desk to steady myself. My chest tightened, but I forced my breathing even. The betrayal was no longer vague. It had taken shape. Joseph's silence in his text was a wound. Amelia's email was salt poured directly into it. I picked up the phone, dialed the planner, and when she answered, her voice was brisk, professional. "Mrs. Carter, what can I do for you?" I didn't waste words. "I received a copy of your correspondence with Amelia." A pause, then a faltering, I apologize. That was not meant to—" "Don't apologize to me," I cut in, my tone sharp, deliberate. "Answer me. Did she instruct you to bar me from the property I own?" Another silence, then a reluctant whisper. "Yes," she insisted. I closed my eyes for one steady beat. "Forward the original email to my legal office. Effective immediately, I will be handling all contracts personally." "Yes, ma'am," she stammered. "Of course." I ended the call without another word. The air in my office felt heavier, charged with a kind of fury I had not touched in years. I rose and paced to the window. Outside, the gardens of the resort stretched in perfect lines, the result of years of careful planning. Every hedge, every stone was chosen by me. And now my own daughter-in-law believed she had the power to erase me from the very empire I had built. I whispered the word under my breath. Disruptive. My reflection in the glass looked back at me, sharper than I remembered. Not weak, not erased. A woman forced into a corner and preparing to strike back. The phone buzzed again. A message from Joseph this time. "Mom, please don't make this harder. Amelia just wants everything smooth. It's nothing personal." Nothing personal. My fingers tightened around the device until my knuckles whitened. A son telling his mother that exclusion was not personal. A fiancé labeling me a disruption. Their voices blended in my head, drowning out every memory of love and gratitude. I typed slowly, deliberately, before deleting every word. I would not waste explanations. I would not beg for inclusion. Words were meaningless now. Actions were the only language left. I turned back to the desk and opened the thick leather folder of contracts. Each page bore my signature. Room blocks under Carter Holdings. Catering orders confirmed through Carter Estates. Venue rights secured by my office, not Joseph's. Not Amelia's, mine. They wanted me gone, but they had built their dream on foundations I controlled. My voice was steady as I said aloud, "If I am disruptive, then I will disrupt in ways they cannot imagine." I remembered Daniel's fountain pen locked in the drawer behind me, heavy and gold-trimmed. He had used it to sign the first deal that saved our family from ruin. I pulled the drawer open, took the pen into my hand, and felt its weight. The ink inside was still full. Its purpose had not ended. I placed the pen on the folder and whispered, "Void." The word tasted clean, sharp, final. My hand hovered over the first contract, ready to strike with the same precision they had used to strike me out of their lives. The word disruptive flashed in my mind again, not as an insult anymore, but as a weapon. They thought I was weak. They thought I would retreat quietly. They forgot who I was. I looked down at my cracked porcelain cup, still half full of tea. Even broken, it carried warmth. Just like me, and just like that cup, I would endure, not fragile, not erased. My heart hardened as clarity cut through every doubt. Joseph had chosen silence. Amelia had chosen contempt. Victoria had chosen manipulation. And I would choose power, the quiet kind, the irreversible kind. The planner's forwarded email remained on my screen, the word disruptive glowing like a challenge. I did not close it. I let it stay there, reminding me of the truth I had avoided for too long. I whispered to the empty room, "You want me gone? Watch what happens when I leave." I capped the fountain pen and slid the first contract toward me. My pulse slowed, my resolve sharpened. From this moment on, every detail of their fairy tale was no longer theirs to command. It was mine to erase, and erase it I would. The first time I saw the knife drawn against me, it wasn't a blade of steel. It was words, polished and sharpened by someone who had spent a lifetime using them as weapons. It happened at a pre-wedding cocktail reception in Coral Gables, hosted by one of Amelia's friends. The ballroom shimmered with gold accents and crystal chandeliers. Laughter rang through the air, glasses clinked, and the scent of roses lingered like perfume too thick to breathe. I had chosen to stand near the window, quiet, observing, holding a glass of sparkling water while others toasted champagne. Then I felt it, the eyes, cold, measuring, not curious, but calculating. Victoria Langford, Amelia's mother, glided across the room. She was dressed in pale silk, pearls at her throat, and heels that clicked like punctuation marks across the marble floor. Every step carried intent. She stopped just close enough that her perfume, a sharp, expensive blend, crowded my lungs. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Evelyn," she said, tilting her head ever so slightly, "you're traditional." The pause was deliberate, the kind that invited others nearby to hear it as a flaw rather than a compliment. Her voice dripped with the kind of polished disdain only old money knows how to disguise. "This wedding needs refinement." A laugh followed, not loud, but cutting, like glass cracking in a silent room. Her gaze traveled from my shoes to my earrings, each second of silence another judgment etched in the air. For a heartbeat, I let her words hang between us. Traditional. Refinement. Words meant to define me, diminish me, erase me. I turned to face her fully, my shoulders squared, my tone calm but sharp, as I answered, "Refinement never needed cruelty." Her smile faltered, just for a second, then returned stronger, brittle like porcelain about to shatter. The mask slipped enough for me to glimpse what hid beneath. Calculation, disdain, and something more dangerous, intent. This wasn't casual arrogance. This was strategy. She leaned closer, her whisper meant only for me. "Joseph and Amelia deserve a future free of distractions. Surely you understand. Sometimes the old must step aside for the new." There it was, not an opinion, a declaration. A mother-in-law's knife, drawn cleanly, slicing through pretense. I held her gaze, steady, unflinching. "You mistake presence for disruption, Victoria, but removing me won't refine them. It will hollow them." Her laugh came again, softer, crueler. "We'll see." She turned, glided back into the crowd, her laughter folding seamlessly into the music and chatter. But I knew what had just happened. This wasn't Amelia's insecurity or Joseph's weakness alone. This was Victoria's orchestration. I stood still, my grip tightening around the glass. A memory rose unbidden, Joseph at 10 years old, playing piano at his school recital. He stumbled, lost his place, froze. The auditorium went silent. I had been in the front row. I started clapping, steady, strong, until others followed. His hands found the keys again, and the music resumed. That night, he whispered, Thanks for not letting them see me fail. Now, years later, his own mother was being painted as the failure, the blemish, the disruption. And this time, he was letting them see it. I exhaled slowly, steadying my pulse. The truth clicked into place. Joseph's text, Amelia's email, Victoria's words, all threads of the same design. It wasn't coincidence. It was a plan. A deliberate effort to erase me from his life and his wedding, executed with the precision of a social surgeon. The realization didn't break me. It hardened me. If they wanted a war of appearances, they had chosen the wrong opponent. My silence had built an empire, my restraint had carved a legacy, and now their cruelty had given me clarity. I placed the glass on the table, the sound sharp against the marble. My reflection in the crystal caught the light, strong lines, unwavering. I whispered to myself, quiet enough that only I could hear, "You want me gone, Victoria? You will learn what absence really means." The ballroom carried on around me, blind to the storm beginning in its corner. But I knew. From this moment on, nothing about their fairy tale would remain untouched. And for the first time since Joseph's message, I no longer felt erased. I felt ready. The phone rang late in the evening. The house was quiet except for the hum of the ceiling fan, and I almost ignored it. But the name flashing across the screen froze me where I stood. Joseph. I pressed the answer button, bracing myself. His voice came through strained, like he was swallowing gravel. "Mom, Amelia's family thinks... Please, don't take it personally." For a moment, I said nothing. His words trailed into silence, filling the line with cowardice. I could hear him breathing, waiting for me to soften, to rescue him as I always had. But this time, I let the silence sharpen. Finally, I spoke, calm and deliberate. "You've made your choice, son." On the other end, I heard him inhale sharply, then choke on his own breath. The pause stretched. I imagined him in that penthouse apartment Amelia adored. Floor-to-ceiling windows, cold marble, not a trace of the warmth we once knew. I pictured his hand pressed against his forehead, his jaw clenched, his eyes wet with the tears of a man torn between love and loyalty. But even through the static of the call, one truth cut through. He wasn't fighting for me. He was letting me be pushed aside. "Mom, it's complicated," he stammered. They think the vibe would be better, more elevated if..." His words faltered. He didn't dare finish. "Elevated without me," I said for him. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of finality. "That's what you mean." He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. Instead, there was a long exhale, shaky and full of shame. I closed my eyes and leaned against the desk. In my mind, Joseph was 10 years old again, sitting on the porch with a scraped knee, crying because the neighborhood boys had left him out of their game. I had knelt beside him, cleaned the wound, kissed his temple, and whispered, "Son, don't let them decide your worth. Stand." And he had, back then. Now, he was 35, and instead of standing, he was bowing to a family who measured worth in wine lists and guest appearances. "Joseph," I said evenly, "you think you're sparing me. You're not. You're sparing them, at my expense." His breath caught again. I heard a soft thud, like he'd sunk onto a chair, maybe with his head in his hands. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered. The words might have meant something once. Tonight, they felt hollow. "You already chose to," I replied, "with that text, with this call, with your silence." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The line buzzed faintly between us, carrying nothing but the weight of what was breaking. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of tears. He wasn't sobbing, not loudly, but I knew my son's breath. The staggered inhale, the shaky exhale. He was crying, though he tried to mask it. "Mom, please." His voice cracked. "I never wanted to hurt you. You just wanted their approval." I cut in, firm, not cruel, "and you decided mine wasn't worth keeping." That silence again, heavy, suffocating. I imagined the tears rolling down his face, but I didn't reach through the line to comfort him. Not this time. Because while my son cried, he still allowed the plan to move forward. He still allowed Amelia's words to brand me as disruptive. He still allowed Victoria's knife to cut. Tears meant nothing when he stood by and let others erase me. "You've made your choice, son," I repeated, slower now so he couldn't mistake me. On the other end, he whispered something so faint I almost missed it. "I'm sorry, but apologies without action are nothing but smoke." I hung up the phone. I sat in the quiet, staring at the dark screen, my reflection faint against the glass. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't undone. The ache was real, yes, but beneath it was something steel-hard. A line had been crossed, and there was no going back. For years, I had carried Joseph's burdens, patched his mistakes, shielded him from storms. Tonight, he let the storm tear me down instead, and that choice, that weakness, would cost him more than he realized. The call ended with him in tears, but me in clarity. His silence had signed the same word I had whispered hours earlier, void. Only this time, it wasn't just contracts I would erase. It was the illusion that I could still be part of a wedding where cruelty wore refinement as a crown. The last thing I told my son echoed in the stillness of my home. "You've made your choice." And my choice was waiting, heavy in the pen, resting on the contracts before me. The mahogany conference table gleamed under the recessed lights, and the air smelled faintly of leather and ink. I sat across from June Wallace, my attorney of 30 years. Her reputation in Miami was legendary, sharp, unflinching, trusted. Tonight, her expression carried a weight that mirrored mine. One by one, she slid the contracts toward me. The first bore the gold-embossed letterhead of Eden Shore Resort, the crown jewel of my empire. Beneath the elegant flourishes, in black and white, sat my name, Carter Hospitality Holdings. June's voice was low, steady. "This covers the venue. Deposit paid, balance due. You hold full authority to rescind." I let my fingers trace the thick paper. For years, I had signed contracts that built an empire brick by brick. Hotels from Miami to Aspen, from Napa Valley to Charleston, all under my stewardship. Yet this was the first time my signature would undo something that struck me so personally. The second folder landed in front of me. Dalton Suites. 200 luxury rooms, blocked off months in advance for guests who would never know whose hands had built those walls. My name again, clear, indisputable. "And this," June continued, sliding the final document across the table, "is the catering. Champagne from Rheims, a 12-course tasting menu, flown-in truffles from Piedmont. Final authority still yours. No perishables ordered yet. Everything is retractable." She folded her hands and studied me carefully. "Evelyn, are you certain you want to proceed? There's still time to pause, to reconsider." I didn't hesitate. My hand rested firmly on the Mont Blanc pen Richard had once used to sign the first deed to our lakeside inn. Its weight in my palm steadied me. "They erased me, June. With one word, disruptive. If they can reduce me to a blemish in their curated picture, then I can reduce their picture to smoke." June didn't flinch. She had seen me make ruthless business calls before, the kind that saved millions or sunk entire negotiations. But this wasn't about profit margins. This was about dignity. Her voice softened. "You understand what this means. No venue, no rooms, no food. 200 guests stranded. Reputations shaken." I met her gaze without wavering. "I won't ruin their lives, June, but I won't fund my own erasure. They planned a wedding without me, so let them host it without me, or without everything I built." The silence between us was heavy, yet resolute. She pushed the first contract closer. "Then sign." I uncapped the pen. The ink flowed as if it had been waiting for this moment. With each stroke of my hand, I felt the sting of rejection transform into something sharp and clean. The venue, void. The hotel, canceled. The catering, terminated. Each signature wasn't vengeance, it was reclamation. They had chosen to treat me as invisible. I was showing them the cost of that choice. When I finished, I pressed the cap back onto the pen and laid it gently on the velvet case. My hands were steady. My heart, calm. June collected the contracts, stacking them neatly. She didn't offer congratulations. She didn't scold me either. Instead, she gave me a long, measured look. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't bargain. You acted. That's all that was needed, I said quietly. She nodded once, a gesture of professional respect. I'll deliver these in person to ensure there's no reversal. By morning, the entire foundation of their wedding will be gone. For a brief moment, I thought of Joseph, his tearful apology, his weak excuses. I pictured Amelia, her manicured hand typing the word disruptive, as if it were nothing but a logistical detail. And I saw Victoria, her smile dripping condescension while dismissing me as outdated. All of them so certain they held control. None of them realizing the ground beneath their perfect stage belonged to me. I rose from the table, smoothing the front of my blazer. Send them the silence they gave me, I told June. No explanation, no spectacle, just absence. Let them fill it however they like. As I walked out into the Miami night, the humid air wrapped around me. The city lights glittered across Biscayne Bay, loud with life and motion. But inside me, there was only stillness. A stillness earned by finally drawing a line. I had been branded disruptive. But in truth, I was the foundation. And now, with one decisive stroke, I had reminded them, without the foundation, everything collapses. The fairy tale they built on my money, my empire, my silence, it had just been voided, and the aisle they dreamed of walking would soon go dark. The conference room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. Contracts lay in a neat stack in front of me, each one already initialed, each one ready for the final word. Across the table sat Chloe Ramirez, the wedding planner Amelia had hired, young, polished, the kind of woman who prided herself on control. Tonight her hands trembled as she shuffled her tablet, eyes darting between me and the documents. "Mrs. Carter," she began, voice uneven, "if you void this, the entire event collapses. There's no backup venue, no secondary catering, no hotel inventory available for that weekend. This wedding will disintegrate. Do you understand?" I looked at her, steady. "I understand perfectly." She leaned forward, desperate. "I've managed over 100 high-profile weddings. Never, never has one unraveled like this. The florists, the decorators, the entertainment, they're all tied to these contracts. If you sign those voids, it isn't just Joseph and Amelia who suffer. It's dozens of vendors, staff, the guests. Everything will fall apart." Her voice cracked slightly at the last word. I watched her carefully, noting the panic edging into her tone. But panic wasn't my language anymore. I uncapped Richard's pen, the Mont Blanc that had signed every major expansion of Carter Hospitality Holdings. The weight of it was familiar, grounding. I pressed the nib to the paper. "Void," I said firmly, writing the word across the line in bold ink. The sound of the pen scratching against paper echoed in the room, sharp, final, like a string snapping under tension. Chloe flinched, as if the noise itself had cut her. Her lips parted, but no words came. For a moment, the reality of what I had done washed over her, draining the color from her face. She whispered, "You just ended it." I placed the pen down gently. "No, they ended it when they erased me. I'm only making the paperwork match the truth." Chloe shook her head, hands gripping the tablet tighter. "You don't understand how this looks. Amelia's family is already high-strung about appearances. This will humiliate them publicly." I let silence hang for a beat before answering. "Humiliation requires an audience. I've made no statement, no spectacle. Their collapse will be private, delivered by silence and logistics. That is far more devastating than any outburst I could stage." Chloe exhaled sharply, pushing back in her chair. Do you have any idea what Amelia will say when she finds out? She will come after me, not you. She'll blame me for failing to protect her vision." I met her panic with calm resolve. She chose this path when she labeled me disruptive. If she thinks her planner could shield her from consequence, then she never understood the foundation she built on. You are not her shield, Chloe. Neither am I. Her eyes glistened with something between fear and grudging respect. Why not fight differently? Why not demand a seat at the wedding instead of tearing it down? I leaned in, my voice firm. Because a seat offered under duress is no honor. I won't beg for scraps at a table I paid to build. If my presence is unwanted, then so is everything that presence provided. She swallowed hard. You're not just voiding contracts. You're pulling the rug out from under your own son's future. That struck deeper than I expected, but I didn't let it show. I folded the signed papers neatly and slid them back across the table. My son's future was never meant to rest on lies and exclusion. If he marries into a family that thrives on cruelty, then he needs to see what cruelty truly costs. Chloe stared at me for a long moment, then finally sank back into her chair. Her shoulders sagged as if the weight of inevitability had landed fully on her. "This wedding is gone," she whispered. "Completely gone." I stood, smoothing my blazer. "Yes, but understand this, Chloe. I'm not your enemy. You'll walk away from this with your integrity intact because you did nothing wrong. Amelia will rage, Joseph will stumble, Victoria will sneer, but you—" I paused, locking eyes with her. "You will know the truth, that I didn't burn the house down. I only reclaimed the matches." For the first time that night, Chloe didn't argue. She simply nodded, stunned into silence. I gathered my bag, slipped the pen into its velvet case, and moved toward the door. Behind me, the sound of her breathing filled the room, quick and shallow, like someone witnessing an avalanche they couldn't stop. As I stepped into the hallway, the click of the door closing behind me sounded like finality itself. My stride was measured, not rushed. Outside, Miami's humid night air hit me, heavy but alive. I drew it in, deep, steady. The fairy tale they had scripted, rooms, champagne, flowers, chandeliers, had just dissolved with one signature. The aisle they thought would glitter with perfection was already dark. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't demanded vengeance. I had simply signed one word that carried more power than their entire performance, void. And with that, everything they believed untouchable vanished overnight. The rehearsal dinner was staged in a private ballroom at a boutique hotel in Coral Gables, a glittering room wrapped in candles and roses. Guests flowed in with laughter, the air thick with expectation. Amelia arrived last, radiant in a silver gown, her hair pinned in perfect curls, a smile wide enough to command every glance in the room. Cameras flashed as friends lifted glasses of champagne to greet her. She looked invincible. Then I watched from the shadows near the far wall as Chloe, the planner, pushed through the crowd. Her hands clutched her tablet too tightly, her face pale under the glow of chandeliers. She caught Amelia's arm, her voice low but trembling. "The resort canceled. Everything is gone." The words hit like a gunshot muffled by velvet. For a moment, Amelia didn't process them. Her smile lingered, frozen, before faltering. "What do you mean?" Chloe swallowed hard. "The contracts? Voided. Venue, rooms, catering, champagne, all gone." The silver flute of champagne slipped from Amelia's hand, shattering against the marble floor. The sharp sound cut through the music and conversation. Silence rippled outward, swallowing laughter mid-sentence. Every head turned. Amelia's face hardened instantly, her smile erased as if it had never been real. Her eyes darted, frantic, toward her mother. Victoria Langford was already moving, her hand clamping down on her daughter's wrist like a vice. Her manicured nails pressed red marks into Amelia's skin. "It must be her!" Victoria hissed, her voice sharp enough for those closest to hear. Her eyes narrowed, sweeping the room as though my presence lingered somewhere in the shadows. She didn't say my name, but everyone knew who she meant. Amelia's lips parted, trembling, but no sound came. She looked trapped, a queen stripped of her crown in front of her court. Guests began whispering. "Cancelled? What happened? All of it? No venue?" The words slithered across the room, feeding on panic. Chloe tried to steady herself. "We can rebook. Another hotel, another caterer. I'll work overnight. We'll salvage it." Her voice broke even as she spoke, the impossibility of her promise evident. Victoria turned on her, eyes blazing. "You allowed this?" Chloe shook her head rapidly. "Mrs. Langford, I had no control. The contracts were under Carter Holdings. Legally, she—" "Enough!" Victoria snapped, cutting her off. Her fury hissed through clenched teeth. "You should have anticipated this." Amelia's hands trembled as she tried to gather composure, brushing shards of glass away from her gown, as if pretending nothing had happened. But her face betrayed her. Pale, tight, desperate. She whispered fiercely to Chloe, "Fix it. I don't care how. Fix it." The guests tried to resume conversation, but their voices cracked, uneasy. The tension in the room was louder than any laughter could mask. Couples exchanged wary glances, unsure whether to leave or stay, their champagne untouched. Joseph entered late, his tie slightly loosened, his expression distracted until he saw the scene. His eyes found Amelia, then Chloe, then the broken glass on the floor. "What happened?" he demanded. Chloe lowered her gaze. "Your wedding, it's gone." His face drained of color. He looked at Amelia, searching for denial, for reassurance. She gave him nothing, just silence. Then she whispered, "Your mother, she did this." The words struck harder than Chloe's announcement. Joseph's jaw clenched, his throat working as he swallowed a mix of rage and dread. His eyes glassed with unshed tears, but he didn't argue. He didn't defend me. He just stood, mute, as if Amelia's accusation had already become truth in his heart. Victoria's voice slashed through the silence once more, cold and certain. "We will not bow to her." Her grip on Amelia's arm tightened. "But know this, she declared war tonight, and war is what she will get." No shouting followed. No scene erupted. The room remained eerily quiet, but faces told the story. Shock, panic, humiliation. It was louder than screams, more violent than a public brawl. Because silence carried shame in ways words never could. I stayed in the shadows, unrecognized by most. I watched the unraveling with a steady breath, my heart calm. This was the moment when power shifted. Not with fireworks, not with spectacle, but with one word on a contract and the echo of glass shattering across marble. The guests would leave that ballroom whispering about collapse, about scandal, about the Carter wedding that disintegrated before it began. And Amelia would never scrub the stain from her perfect image. As I turned to go, I caught Joseph's profile, his hand pressed against his forehead, his shoulders slumped under the weight of silence. For a fleeting moment, I wished he would stand, speak, prove me wrong. But he didn't. He let the silence consume him, just as he had let Amelia and Victoria dictate the cost of my presence. I stepped out into the night air, the faint hum of music and whispers still bleeding from the ballroom behind me. My heels clicked against the pavement, measured and certain. Inside, they clutched at fragments of a broken fairy tale. Outside, I walked away knowing the truth. Their perfect aisle was already dark, and I hadn't needed to raise my voice once. The wedding that was meant to crown Amelia and Joseph's new life did not unfold in the grand ballroom they had imagined. It didn't happen under chandeliers dripping with crystal or in a hall lined with roses imported from Ecuador. Instead, it was pushed into a municipal community center on the far edge of Miami, a building that smelled faintly of bleach and floor wax, with scuffed linoleum and buzzing fluorescent lights overhead. I arrived early, unseen, slipping in through a side corridor. I wanted to witness it, not to gloat, but to mark the truth of what they had done. If they erased me, they deserved to see what their picture looked like without me holding it up. The room was narrow, the ceilings low. Plastic folding chairs stood in crooked rows, some wobbling where their legs bent unevenly. Instead of marble floors, the guests would step across cracked tile. Instead of soft candlelight, harsh neon strips hummed, casting everything in an unforgiving glare. Only a fraction of the invited guests showed up, perhaps a third. The others had canceled once the resort withdrew, unwilling to trade luxury for mediocrity. Those who remained shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering among themselves. Their eyes betrayed disappointment. They had dressed for opulence, but they found themselves in a hall used more often for bingo nights and PTA meetings than for weddings. The string quartet Amelia had boasted about was gone. In its place, a lone speaker system hissed faintly, playing a pre-recorded melody that skipped when someone walked too close to the chords. There were no roses, only plastic table centerpieces borrowed from a rental warehouse. No champagne towers, only warm bottles of generic sparkling wine on a folding table. Then Amelia entered. She wore the same gown she had chosen for grandeur, but under fluorescent lights, its brilliance dulled to a sheen that looked cheap. She stepped carefully down the narrow aisle, her heels clicking on the linoleum. Her face was pale, tight, lips pressed in a line that pretended composure but betrayed panic. The room didn't erupt in cheers. It didn't roar with applause. A few hands clapped, hesitant, scattered, the sound small and brittle. The silence between those claps was louder than thunder. Joseph stood waiting at the front, but he was not radiant. His posture sagged, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. He looked like a man performing a role he no longer believed in. His hands fidgeted, his gaze darted, never steady. As Amelia reached him, she forced a smile, but it cracked almost instantly. The officiant began speaking, his voice echoing against the bare walls, but no one listened closely. Guests whispered louder now, unable to ignore the stark collapse of what had been promised as a luxury affair. I caught fragments. This was supposed to be at Carter's resort. I heard everything was canceled overnight. Can you believe this? The words circled like vultures. Victoria sat in the front row, her spine rigid, jaw clenched so tightly the muscles trembled. Her hands gripped the program until the paper tore. She kept her eyes fixed on the ceremony, refusing to acknowledge the whispers, but humiliation burned across her face. Chloe, the planner, stood at the back, shoulders stiff, eyes hollow. She had done what she could, but even she knew this was beyond repair. She avoided Amelia's gaze, knowing the bride would look for someone to blame. The vows were rushed, muttered, as though the words themselves could hide the shame in the room. Joseph's voice cracked when he said, "I do," and his eyes glistened with unshed tears. Not tears of joy, but of something closer to regret. Amelia's "I do" came sharper, clipped, a desperate attempt to maintain control. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the room offered a thin scattering of claps again. No standing ovation, no champagne toast, just the hollow echo of obligation. As they turned to face their guests, the contrast was unbearable. Instead of triumph, their faces reflected strain. Instead of admiration, the guests looked away, embarrassed for them. I stayed in the shadows, watching every detail. The bride who had dismissed me as disruptive walked down an aisle that felt smaller than her pride. The son who had told me not to take it personally now stood under buzzing neon lights, stripped of grandeur, clutching a marriage born not of love alone, but of manipulation and cowardice. The fairy tale they had tried to script had collapsed in full view of those they sought to impress. And none of them dared speak my name, but everyone knew the truth. I left before the reception began, though I knew there would be little to see. No ballroom dancing, no extravagant feast, only paper plates, cheap wine, and the bitter taste of humiliation. As I stepped outside into the Miami night, I inhaled deeply. The air was warm, humid, alive. Behind me, in that small hall, they stood in the ruins of their choices. Ahead of me stretched the city I had helped shape, the empire I still commanded. They thought erasing me would polish their image. Instead, they erased their own dignity. I walked away with steady steps, knowing I hadn't needed to scream, hadn't needed to fight. One word on paper had been enough. void. And now, on the day that should have crowned them, silence and shame were their only witnesses. The wedding ended in silence, the guests scattering before the cake had even been cut. I didn't stay to see the aftermath. I already knew what the room had felt like. Humiliation has a weight that lingers longer than applause. But that evening, as the sky over Miami burned red with sunset, I heard the sound of fists pounding against my front door, heavy, desperate, furious. I rose from my chair, the cracked porcelain teacup still warm in my hand, and opened it to find Joseph standing there. His tie hung loose, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. "Mom!" he spat, his voice raw with rage. "You embarrassed us. You made us look cheap." I didn't flinch. I stepped back, letting him storm inside, watching as he paced the living room like a man trying to outrun his own shame. His hands shook, his face red. "Do you have any idea what you did?" People laughed. They whispered. "We were humiliated. Amelia, she—" His voice cracked, and he shoved his hands into his hair. "You destroyed us." I placed the teacup gently on the table, its porcelain clinking against the wood. My movements were calm, deliberate, a sharp contrast to the storm unraveling before me. "No, Joseph," I said, my voice steady. "I didn't embarrass you. I didn't make you look cheap. I simply closed what never had my blessing." He froze, staring at me, his breath uneven. I continued, each word precise, like a gavel striking. "You built a wedding on money you didn't own, on venues you didn't control, on hospitality that existed because of me. And then you told me I didn't belong in it. You wanted the vibe without the root that made it possible. If it was about the vibe, let the vibe pay for itself." Joseph's jaw tightened. "You could have come quietly. You could have just stayed away, let it happen. Why ruin it for us?" "Stayed away?" I repeated, my tone colder now. "After you erased me with a text? After Amelia called me disruptive? After Victoria looked me in the eye and told me to step aside? You thought I would hand over the foundation of my life's work so you could pretend I didn't exist?" His lips parted, but no words came. His chest heaved, his eyes wet. He looked like a child again, cornered, ashamed, but too stubborn to admit it. "You embarrassed yourselves, Joseph," I said, leaning forward, "when you chose to silence your mother instead of standing for her, when you let cruelty define refinement, when you let a family that never built anything dictate who belonged in mine." The words landed like blows. He staggered back, one hand bracing against the wall as if my calmness struck harder than his fury. I thought I was protecting Amelia," he whispered finally. His voice was thin, fragile. "Her family, they care so much about appearances. I thought, if you weren't there, it would be easier." "Easier for who?" I demanded. "For her? For you? You wanted convenience, not love. You chose their approval over mine. And tonight you saw what their approval is worth without the ground I gave you to stand on." His eyes glistened. A tear slipped down his cheek, and he didn't bother to wipe it. For a moment, silence filled the room again, the same silence that had sat between us during his weak apology on the phone. But now it was louder, heavier, inescapable. I picked up the teacup once more, turning it in my hands. The crack along its handle caught the lamplight, a flaw that had never broken it. I set it down with care and looked him straight in the eye. "You've made your choice, son," I said quietly, but with finality. He shook his head, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean for this." "But you allowed it," I cut in. "That is worse than meaning. You let it happen. You stood silent while others cut me out, and then you blamed me for reminding you what silence costs." He pressed his palms to his face, breathing hard, his shoulders trembling, but he didn't argue anymore, because he couldn't. Every truth was laid bare, and he had no shield left. When he finally lowered his hands, his eyes were red, his face streaked with tears. He looked at me with something between sorrow and recognition, but it was too late. I stood, my voice calm, my words sharp. "Go home, Joseph. Stand with the choice you made. Stand with the woman who called me a disruption. Stand with the family who thinks refinement is worth more than blood. I will not beg you to stand with me." He lingered a moment longer, as if searching for a way back. But no words came. He turned, walked to the door, and paused with his hand on the knob. His shoulders sagged. His voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry." The door closed softly behind him. I sat back down, lifting the cracked teacup to my lips, savoring the warmth still left inside. My hands were steady, my heart calm. Joseph's tears hadn't changed the truth. They had only confirmed it. He had chosen them, and I had chosen silence. But silence, when wielded with resolve, can break louder than any shout. And tonight, it had. The first headline broke less than 24 hours after the ceremony. I saw it on the front page of the Miami Herald. Bold letters stretched across glossy print. "Lavish Carter wedding canceled overnight." Beneath it, a photo of Amelia in her gown, caught mid-stride under the harsh neon lights of the community center. The contrast between her glittering dress and the dingy linoleum floor told the story better than any words could. The article spared no detail. It explained how the grand venue had been withdrawn without warning, how the guests were shuffled into a hall meant for neighborhood meetings, how the catering was reduced to reheated trays and lukewarm wine. And then came the speculation. Why had it collapsed? Why had the Carter name, once synonymous with elegance, become tied to chaos? By noon, social media had turned the wedding into spectacle. Hashtags trended, photos leaked. Guests who had attended snapped pictures of plastic chairs, cracked tiles, and a bride's forced smile. On Twitter, someone captioned an image. "From luxury resort to high school gym, guess refinement couldn't buy stability." Amelia tried to fight back. She uploaded carefully staged photos of herself and Joseph, cropped tight to hide the room, her captions dripping with forced joy. "The happiest day of our lives." Perfection in every way. But the internet is merciless. Comments flooded beneath her posts. "Perfection looks like a budget prom." "Where's the champagne tower you bragged about?" "Funny, I heard the resort pulled out because of family drama." "Lavish, more like tragic." Her smile in those photos only fueled the fire. People compared the glossy captions to the humiliating images guests had already shared, and the lies became more obvious with each post. Joseph stayed silent online. His account went dark. No updates, no comments. But silence in the digital age speaks louder than words. The world assumed guilt. Vendors began pulling out too. Florists refused to honor future bookings tied to the Langford name. The string quartet that had been contracted released a statement. "We regret the circumstances and will not engage further with clients unwilling to respect agreements." Even the hotel group that managed side bookings sent notice they would no longer do business with Amelia's family. Victoria raged behind closed doors, but her fury couldn't silence the ripple effect. Society women whispered at luncheons. Invitations disappeared. Promises of partnerships evaporated. The Langfords, who had built their reputation on control and polish, now carried the stink of scandal. I sat in my office, reading the coverage, sipping tea from the cracked cup that had become my companion. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had been dismissed as outdated, unpolished, disruptive. Yet here it was, refinement itself crumbling under the weight of arrogance. One article struck me hardest. It quoted an anonymous guest. "The wedding collapsed because they forgot who built the ground they stood on. They wanted the Carter name, but not the Carter woman." I set the paper down slowly, letting the words sink in. The truth had slipped into the world without me speaking a single word. Silence had done its work. But Amelia didn't relent. I heard from an acquaintance that she threw a glass across the room when the latest wave of online ridicule reached her. She screamed that I had orchestrated it, that I had ruined her life on purpose. But her rage didn't change reality. She could post filtered pictures all she wanted. The world already knew the truth. Joseph came by once more, days later, his face pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He didn't shout this time. He didn't accuse. He just stood in my doorway, broken. "They won't stop talking, he whispered. "Everywhere we go, people look at us. Amelia, she's unraveling, and I don't know how to stop it." I studied him carefully. He looked older, weaker, as if the cost of silence had finally landed on him. I set my cup down and said evenly, "This is the price of choices made in arrogance. The world always sees the truth, Joseph. No caption can hide it." He didn't argue. He didn't even cry. He just nodded, shoulders slumped, and left without another word. The unraveling was no longer confined to that one night. It spread like fire, through headlines, through whispers, through every corner of their carefully cultivated world. And as I watched it from my quiet place, I knew one thing with certainty. They had tried to erase me. Instead, they had erased themselves. And all it had taken was silence, one word written in ink, and the weight of truth no one could bury. The Langfords gathered at their estate a week after the headlines broke. I was not there in body, but I knew the details. Whispers carried fast through the circles we both inhabited. The marble dining hall, usually a place for charity luncheons and gala planning, now felt like a courtroom. Chandeliers glistened above, but the atmosphere was suffocating. The Langfords' friends and extended relatives sat stiff in their chairs, their eyes darting between Amelia and her mother. Victoria Langford stood at the head of the table, posture rigid, pearls gleaming at her throat like armor. Her gaze was fixed on Amelia, sharp enough to pierce through any pretense. "I warned you," Victoria's voice sliced through the silence, "not to bring embarrassment to this family." Every syllable dripped with venom. "And yet, you sabotaged the foundation of this marriage. Do you even understand what you've done?" Amelia's hands trembled around her napkin, her face blotched red from suppressed tears. "Mother, it wasn't me. It was—" "Don't you dare deflect!" Victoria snapped, slamming her palm against the table so hard the crystal glasses rattled. "You brought her into this. You poked a woman who built an empire, and you thought she wouldn't strike back? You were reckless, Amelia. Weak. You exposed us to ridicule we may never recover from." The room stayed hushed, guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. No one dared intervene. Amelia broke, tears spilling freely as she stammered, "I was trying to protect the image. You always said appearances mattered most. You told me refinement is everything. I thought if she wasn't there—" Victoria's laugh was cold, sharp. "Refinement? You call this refinement? Empty chairs at your wedding, vendors cutting ties, your face splashed across tabloids as the bride who couldn't hold her own family together. That is not refinement. That is failure." Amelia sobbed openly now, clutching at her napkin like it might hold her upright. "I did everything you told me." "I listened. I followed. You followed poorly," Victoria hissed, her words slicing deeper. "You were supposed to secure control. Instead, you handed it to her. You let Evelyn Carter humiliate us all. You couldn't even keep your own mother-in-law contained." Joseph sat beside Amelia, silent, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the opposite wall. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't offer comfort. His face was carved in stone, his gaze distant. When Amelia turned toward him, desperate for support, he refused to meet her eyes. That, more than Victoria's scorn, broke her completely. Victoria straightened, scanning the room of watching eyes. This family built its name on strength, on control, on being untouchable. Now look at us. We're the laughingstock of Miami, and it's because my daughter thought she could play games with a Carter. The guests remained silent, heads lowered, unwilling to side with either mother or daughter. The silence itself condemned Amelia more than words ever could. Amelia whispered through her sobs, "I just wanted to be perfect." Victoria leaned closer, her voice sharp as glass. "Perfection is not what you want, Amelia. It's what you execute. And you failed." Amelia buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Around her, the table was frozen in discomfort, no one daring to break the tension. Joseph finally spoke, his tone flat, void of warmth. "Enough." Victoria turned her gaze on him, eyebrows arched. "You think I'm wrong?" He shook his head once, his expression hollow. "I think none of this matters anymore. The damage is done." His words landed like stones in the quiet hall. Amelia lifted her tear-streaked face, searching for him, but his eyes remained cold, distant, fixed on a point far away. The twist was clear. Victoria had spent her life wielding control like a weapon, believing it could shield her family from failure. But now, in her fury, she didn't protect her daughter. She crushed her. Instead of saving Amelia, she drove her deeper into shame. Later, I heard from someone who had attended that dinner. "Evelyn," they told me, "it wasn't you who destroyed Amelia. It was her own mother. She gutted her in front of everyone." I only nodded when I heard it. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I simply understood what power unchecked by wisdom always becomes. A blade that eventually cuts its own hand. And Amelia, who once thought refinement meant exclusion, was now left with nothing but her mother's fury and her husband's silence. That night, in their house of marble and chandeliers, the Langfords fell further than any headline could capture, and I didn't have to lift a finger. It was 3 days after the wedding collapsed when Chloe appeared at my office unannounced. My assistant hesitated to let her in, but I waved her through. I wanted to see what had brought her here, pale and shaken, holding her planner tablet like a shield. She sat across from me at the conference table, her posture tense, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. For a moment she said nothing, just breathed heavily, as though she had run all the way from the Langford estate. Finally, her voice broke through the silence. "I've planned 200 weddings," she said, her tone low but urgent. "High society, billionaires, politicians, people who think the world revolves around them. I've seen family feuds, scandals, even runaway brides, but never once have I seen someone erased like that. Not the way they erased you. And never," she paused, swallowing, "have I seen anyone fight back so quietly." I didn't move, didn't smile. I let her words hang in the room like smoke. Then I answered with the calm that had carried me through every storm. "Silence has its weight." Her eyes filled with something close to awe. She leaned forward, her hands trembling. "When you signed those voids, I thought you were destroying them out of spite. But that wasn't it, was it? You weren't loud. You didn't lash out. You just withdrew, and the entire structure fell." I met her gaze, steady. "I didn't destroy them. They destroyed themselves when they built on a foundation they didn't own. I simply stopped holding it up for them." Chloe nodded, her lips pressed together, as if those words cut deeper than any headline she had read. She lowered her eyes to her lap. "I tried to warn Amelia. I told her appearances aren't everything. But she only listened to her mother. She believed control was the same as power. She never understood the difference until it was too late." Her voice trembled as she continued. "I thought I was doing my job by following her orders, but when I forwarded that email by mistake and you saw the word she used, disruptive, I knew something irreversible had begun. Still, I didn't expect this." I leaned back, folding my hands. "That word didn't wound me, Chloe. It defined them. They thought I was a blemish. They thought my silence was weakness. They forgot that silence can carry consequence heavier than any argument." She lifted her head, her eyes glistening now. "The way Amelia looked when I told her everything was canceled. I've never seen a bride fall apart so fast. And Victoria, her fury didn't save her daughter. It crushed her. That night, I realized you weren't the one who lost dignity. They were." I let her speak. She needed to. This wasn't just her confession. It was her reckoning. "I came here," she said softly, "because I had to tell you. In that chaos, you were the only one who kept your dignity. I was terrified. Vendors panicked. Amelia screamed. Victoria raged. Joseph stood paralyzed. And you didn't even raise your voice. You signed your name, and the world shifted. I studied her, the young woman who had once thought herself in control of every detail. Now she understood what true control looked like. "Dignity isn't loud," I said. "It isn't a performance. It's restraint. It's knowing when to let silence speak for you." Chloe bowed her head, her shoulders trembling as though she carried the weight of guilt. "I've been chasing perfect pictures, flawless events, pleasing people who will never be satisfied. but watching what happened to them, it changed something in me. I don't want to work for people who think cruelty is refinement. I'd rather plan a wedding in a barn for two people who actually love each other than another grand farce like that. Her confession surprised me, though I kept my face unreadable. She was younger than Amelia, yet already learning a lesson Amelia might never grasp. She looked at me again, her voice firmer now. I needed to tell you. Evelyn, you didn't lose anything that night. You revealed the truth. And I'll never forget it. For the first time, I let a trace of warmth touch my tone. Remember this, Chloe. Silence has its weight, but dignity, that's the only currency that never devalues. Guard it, and you'll never fear collapse. She nodded, tears slipping free now, unashamed. She rose slowly, clutching her tablet to her chest. At the door, she turned back. Thank you. Not for ending their wedding, for reminding me what strength really looks like. When she left, the room fell silent again. I picked up my cracked porcelain teacup, the flaw catching the afternoon light, and smiled faintly. In that broken cup, I saw myself reflected. Imperfect, yes, but still holding everything it needed to hold. Chloe was right. In the ruins of their perfection, I had kept the only thing that mattered, and as the whispers spread across Miami, no one could deny it. The resort lobby was always alive with movement. Concierges greeting guests, bellmen rolling carts, staff exchanging quiet words as they passed. Yet in the days after the Langford wedding collapsed, the air carried something different. A hum, low and steady, like the sound of water rushing beneath the surface. Whispers followed me wherever I went. She didn't yell, one housekeeper murmured to another as they passed with carts of fresh linen. She didn't fight, but she won. I've never seen anything like it, another voice said behind the reception desk. One word, void, and an empire remembered who owned it. I pretended not to hear, but their words reached me anyway. The tone was not gossip, it was reverence. When I walked across the marble floor that morning, heels clicking with deliberate rhythm, I felt eyes on me. Staff members straightened subtly, shoulders squared. A bellman paused mid-step to dip his head in a gesture of quiet respect. The front desk clerks glanced at each other before lowering their gazes, their whispers silenced as I passed. I did not demand this. I never had. For years, I built Carter hospitality with my late husband in silence, always content to stand behind the curtains while others basked under chandeliers I had chosen. But now, after being branded disruptive and erased from my own son's wedding, silence had become the loudest voice in the room. As I approached the elevator, I caught fragments of conversation from two young attendants. She didn't even raise her voice. No spectacle, no screaming, just a signature. That's real power. The words lingered as the elevator doors slid open. I stepped inside, but before the doors closed, one of the attendants looked up and met my eyes. His voice was quiet, but firm. Mrs. Carter, we're proud to work under your name. The doors shut, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. When I reached the executive floor, my assistant handed me the latest press clippings. Headlines still churned. Lavish Carter wedding canceled overnight. Vendors sever ties with Langfords. The collapse of refinement. I placed them aside without comment. I didn't need newspapers to tell me what I already knew. The true confirmation had come from the whispers of my own staff, the quiet acknowledgments that traveled faster than headlines. They had seen everything, the arrogance of the Langfords, the cruelty of Amelia, the silence of Joseph, and they had seen me, not loud, not vengeful, just resolute. Later that afternoon, I walked through the resort gardens. The groundskeepers, usually focused on their tasks, paused to nod respectfully. One even removed his cap, though I said nothing to prompt it. At the fountain, a group of junior managers stopped their discussion mid-sentence when they noticed me. Their eyes followed as I passed, their silence charged not with fear, but with recognition. I thought of what Chloe had told me only days earlier. You were the only one who kept your dignity. Now I saw it reflected everywhere I went. In the way employees stood taller as I entered a room, in the way guests whispered my name with curiosity rather than scandal, in the way a single word, void, had echoed louder than any argument could. A small twist revealed itself in that moment. Power did not need to roar. It did not need to flaunt. Real power was quiet, deliberate, unshaken. One word written in ink had carried more weight than Victoria's rage, Amelia's captions, or Joseph's excuses. I stopped by the cracked porcelain cup on my office desk, the same one I always returned to. I lifted it gently, the imperfection glinting under the afternoon sun. The cup had never broken despite its flaw. It reminded me of myself. Flawed, perhaps, but unshaken. As I sipped the tea, the hum of the resort carried upward from the lobby, staff moving with purpose, guests arriving with their luggage, the empire alive and thriving. They knew now, more than ever, who stood at the foundation. And I knew this. Silence had its weight. It did not scream. It did not beg. It simply endured. And when wielded at the right moment, silence was the sharpest instrument of all. The morning sun spilled across my desk, soft and golden, when the knock came at the door. My assistant brought in a plain envelope, cream-colored, with no return address, no handwriting on the outside, nothing to suggest where it had come from. I turned it over slowly, weighing it in my hand. It wasn't heavy. No legal letterhead, no official stamp. Just an ordinary envelope, as quiet as the silence that had reshaped everything these past weeks. I slid my finger under the flap and opened it. Inside, there was only a single photograph and a slip of paper. The photograph was of a newborn baby girl, wrapped in a hospital blanket, her tiny fists curled, her face scrunched in the innocence of sleep. She looked fragile and new, untouched by the chaos of the world. My hands stilled, my chest tightened. I unfolded the slip of paper. The handwriting was shaky, rushed, almost desperate. "Her name is Grace. I thought you should know." That was all. No signature, no explanation. Just those words, trembling on the page. For a long time, I sat in silence, staring at the picture. The child's cheeks were soft, pink, untouched by deceit or ambition. Her eyes, closed in peace, carried none of the arrogance of Amelia or the cowardice of Joseph. She was unmarked. A blank page. My throat tightened. "Grace," I whispered, letting the name linger in the air. It felt delicate, full of promise, a name untouched by cruelty. I pressed the photograph to my chest, my cracked porcelain teacup still sitting warm on the desk beside me. The irony was not lost on me. Families fracture, empires rise and fall, but life insists on beginning again. The letter hadn't asked for forgiveness. It hadn't begged for inclusion. It simply informed me. Someone, Joseph, Amelia, perhaps even Chloe, had decided that I deserved to know, and that knowledge alone shifted something deep inside me. I lifted the picture once more, studying every detail. The soft curl of hair, the tiny fingers curled tight, my lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. Not triumphant, not vengeful, something quieter, more fragile. "I'll keep a chair ready," I murmured, my voice steady, though my chest ached, "if one day she needs it." Because I knew the truth. Children inherit more than names. They inherit choices, silences, burdens, and scars. One day Grace would grow old enough to see through the curated facades, the polished lies, the fractured smiles. And when that day came, I would be here, not waiting with bitterness, but with space. With a chair no one else could take from her, I slipped the photograph back into the envelope and locked it inside my desk drawer, not hidden in shame, kept in protection, a promise to myself and perhaps to her. Outside my window, the resort carried on. Guests arrived with their luggage, valets opened doors, staff moved with precision. Life didn't pause for scandal. The world didn't bend for humiliation. But inside that envelope, one small life had shifted everything. Grace. A name that meant more than survival, more than victory. It meant renewal. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. My empire still stood. My dignity remained intact. And somewhere in Miami, a baby had been born into chaos. She would need truth one day. She would need someone who understood the weight of silence, the cost of arrogance, the price of erasure. And when that day came, she would find her grandmother's chair waiting. The crack in my porcelain cup caught the morning light as I reached for it once more. Imperfect, yes, but still holding, just like me. The morning air carried the scent of salt and jasmine as I walked through the terrace of the resort. The ocean stretched endless before me, waves glittering under the rising sun. Guests had not yet filled the lobby. The silence of dawn belonged to me alone. I carried a single chair, simple, wooden, unadorned, out to the tea table I often used to begin my day. The cracked porcelain cup was already there, waiting, its flaw catching the first light of morning. I placed the chair beside it, a quiet addition, no announcement, no explanation. For years I had sat at this table alone. I had made decisions that shaped an empire here, sipped tea while weighing contracts, grieved the loss of Richard, felt the sting of betrayal, and chosen silence as my sharpest weapon. And now, one more chair stood ready, not for Joseph, not for Amelia. Their choices were theirs to live with. This chair was for Grace, the granddaughter whose picture had arrived in that anonymous envelope, a child untouched by cruelty, untainted by arrogance, a child who, one day, might search for truth among lies. The sun rose higher, painting the sea in hues of fire and gold. My reflection shimmered in the surface of the tea, fractured slightly by the crack in the cup, yet whole enough to hold. I spoke softly, though my words carried the weight of steel. Fairy tales built on lies vanish overnight. But love, if it's real, always finds its way back. I let the silence that followed settle like a benediction. The waves answered, steady and eternal. I leaned back, hands folded, eyes on the empty chair. It was not a symbol of weakness nor of longing. It was a promise that even when erased, I endured, that even in betrayal, I held my ground. And that one day, when innocence sought a place to sit, it would not find the door closed. The camera of memory would have panned slowly outward then, catching the expanse of the Miami shoreline, the grandeur of the resort I had built, the quiet power of a woman once dismissed as disruptive. And at the center of it all, a cracked teacup, a waiting chair, and the certainty that truth needs no applause. The frame lingered on the horizon as the sun broke fully over the sea. The light was fierce, unyielding, yet beautiful. Fade out.